It's actually funny. The Pentagon has put out an alert about coverage of the Israeli massacre in Nuseirat refugee camp that took place 3 days ago. Well, more like 2.5 days ago. And they're claiming that those who are pointing to a U.S. role in this hideous massacre, one of the worst of the assault on the besieged Gaza Strip, are engaged in disinformation, and they're extremely concerned about this. And the idea that the U.S. didn't play any role in this is just absolutely sick. I don't know where to start here. But I think we should start with the footage of the conclusion of this raid on Nuseirat, and then we'll kind of we'll start from the end and kind of go backwards. This is a summary by our friend Afshin Ratanzi on how the Nuseirat massacre unfolded. Israel used the U.S.-built humanitarian pier to sneak in a unit of Israeli soldiers and reportedly American soldiers. Now, we don't know if that part is true, but we'll see from the imagery something that is just undeniable. The soldiers boarded a humanitarian aid truck and drove to Nuseirat refugee camp. That appears to be substantiated and true. Once inside, they're discovered by Palestinians, which resulted in nonstop Israeli aerial bombardment, and the soldiers opened fire inside the central market, killing over 210 and injuring hundreds. Death tolls now over 270 and 700 wounded. An absolute bloodbath. The humanitarian pier gets exposed to be an occupation, assassination, and massacre pier. The Americans cannot be trusted. And look at this. This is that is the Israeli helicopter awaiting the arrival of the rescued hostages. And you can even see Hebrew writing on what looks like destroyed structures on the beach because of the presence of the Israeli military. And behind it, these are American Army and trucks, along with aid trucks, on the aid pier that we warned at the Grayzone months ago would be used for destructive military operations and would put U.S. military personnel in harm's way. There's an Israeli soldier speaking Hebrew. So you get the point. Obviously, the U.S. is freaked out about this footage. This was the response by Centcom to discussion about that footage. The humanitarian pier facility, including its equipment, personnel, and assets, were not used in the operation to rescue hostages today in Gaza. An area south of the facility was used by the Israelis to safely return the hostages to Israel. Any such claim to the contrary is false. The temporary pier on the coast of Gaza was put in place for one purpose only: to help move additional, urgently needed life-saving assistance into Gaza. And this is how I responded, which is an area south of the facility was used by the Israelis. Like how far south? Like a few meters? I mean, just look how close that helicopter is. It would have been absolutely impossible for Israel to have pulled this off with the helicopter on the ground unless they were doing so in an area that had been completely secured. And this is an area that is apparently secured by U.S. mercenaries for the offloading of humanitarian aid. It doesn't look like Hamas is declaring the U.S. to be a combatant. It hasn't prior to this point. But now, all bets are off, and it looks like the Pentagon is just lying. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Well, look, let's assume for a second they're telling the truth, which I also am highly suspicious of, given especially the pier was a fake stunt to begin with. There was never any intention of being serious about delivering aid. It was just there to distract from the fact that Biden was not pressuring Israel to drop its blockade, its land blockade of Gaza. And this was a PR stunt to distract from that. So it's perfectly consistent to me that the cynical administration would let that pier be used for an actual military operation against Gaza. But let's assume for a second that it's not. No matter whether the pier was directly involved or not, the Biden administration was directly complicit in this massacre. They supplied intelligence to Israel and who knows what else. In fact, Jake Sullivan was asked about this on ABC News, and he gave a very vague response.
With American support for this mission in Israel, in Gaza, the U.S. provided support for that mission. Was it just logistical or intelligence help, or were they part of the planning?
Well, first, Martha, we didn't have any U.S. forces on the ground. Second, we've been working for months to support Israel in its efforts to rescue and recover hostages from Gaza, including the American hostages. And there weren't Americans among these four. But I'm not going to speak further to intelligence or operational matters because we need to protect their sensitivity.
So the only thing he says there is we didn't have forces on the ground. But he did not rule out an operational role, because he said, I'm not going to speak to intelligence or operational matters, which means that the U.S. may have had an operational role. I think, to me, that's a confirmation that they did. And obviously, it's known from other reports that they supplied intelligence. So whatever the specifics are, the Biden administration is complicit in this massacre, which, as you said, left over 275 Palestinian civilians dead. And there are even reports, actually, I haven't verified this yet, but there were reports that maybe Israeli hostages were killed as well. 4 were rescued, but I believe the Al-Qassam brigades claimed, and I haven't seen it verified, so who knows, but that is what they said, that Israeli hostages were killed in this operation.
Yep. According to the Al-Qassam brigades, 3 hostages were killed in the course of this operation, including one with an American passport. And I haven't seen any independent confirmation, but they've generally told the truth about what was taking place on the ground. For example, when they released a video featuring one of the hostages who was rescued, Noah Argamani, detailing how she was attacked by Israeli airstrikes, had shrapnel in her head, and 2 of the Israeli hostages who were with her were killed in that airstrike. That has been corroborated by Argamani's testimony since being released. So I think there are more terrible details to come. But Jake Sullivan, I don't know if this was him jumping the gun. He hailed the Israeli operation, which was a straight up massacre, which included 7 bombings, helicopters firing everywhere, executions on site by special forces, as a daring operation. Today, Israeli security forces conducted a successful operation to rescue 4 hostages from the grips of Hamas in Gaza. The United States is supporting all efforts to rescue secure the release of hostages still held by Hamas. And then this is a key line. This includes through ongoing negotiations or other means. First of all, daring operation, successful operation. In what world is the killing of close to 300 people and the wounding of 700 and the possible killing of 3 hostages in order to rescue 4 hostages a successful operation? The operation was actually botched. The mass killings that took place, the bombings, destruction of an entire market, all the body parts that flowed into hospitals of children, the video of children dying in their parents' arms. All of this was because the Israelis were found out. Their deception failed, and they couldn't reach their point or be extracted without massive death, havoc, and destruction. And Jake Sullivan's calling that successful? Did he not know? Well, we can be sure that he greenlighted this operation, and the U.S. has blood all over its hands. Go ahead, Aaron, you're muted.
Well, sorry, I was muted. We're dealing with people who don't see Palestinians as equal human beings, because you can't say the mass slaughter of 275 plus people is a success unless you don't see the people who were killed as human beings. It's just what it comes down to. It's the the only world in which that is a success is if you're a sociopath, and that's what these people are. They're just completely cut off from the notion that Palestinians are equal human beings. They can't process that thought.
Yeah. I mean, this is all they seem to care about, like the Israelis, is Jewish life. And I can't show any of the footage of the aftermath of the massacre, just because we'll immediately be demonetized and suppressed even more than we currently are. Elon Musk's X has deleted footage I and others tweeted showing disemboweled bodies and body parts at Al-Aqsa Hospital. Just horrific footage. And Blinken and Jake Sullivan hailed this entire operation without even mentioning civilian casualties. So at the same time, Blinken is back in the region. He's in Israel right now to pose as an honest broker, demanding that Hamas just take these terms. They're trying to completely hijack all ceasefire negotiations at the United Nations and reject any other country's input. And at the same time, they're sponsoring massacres inside Gaza. We have some footage of testimony from an eyewitness to the massacre in Nuseirat, and I cannot vouch for the accuracy, but I think it needs to be considered. What he's saying is very provocative. This is a young boy from Nuseirat, and he's saying that
يمكن 6 7 وصار انه يخبط وين في انصراط حوالين العود بعد ما خبطن لو لقينا.
Look, we'll just quote the key part here. We saw a group of special forces, American special forces. Those who attacked us in our homes were not Israeli forces. They were American. And Biden, the guy who talks about American humanitarian aid who built the pier, is bringing tanks through the pier. And the person who killed my brother is one of them from Biden's army. That's essentially what this witness was saying. I don't know if it's true. There is speculation about the uniforms of those involved in the rescue team, but the U.S. claims there were no troops on the ground. One thing we can be fairly certain of is that Israel and Israeli special forces used humanitarian aid as a Trojan horse in order to penetrate Nuseirat refugee camp. There's footage of an aid truck going in along with other trucks. And here's a witness who was shot on site by the Israelis, describing how he was, what he saw. And I don't know where I don't know where there were supposed to be subtitles. Yeah, I guess the subtitled version is elsewhere, but he's essentially saying that those who fired on him were carrying aid and were dressed as aid workers.
Yeah, there's a photograph going around of someone being shot, a passerby being shot from the fake aid truck. So
Yeah.
Israel, and doing this, on top of doing this commit war crimes, doing this also endangers actual aid workers, because now that just raises the suspicion that foreign aid workers in Gaza could be Israelis in disguise. Who knows what kind of accidents that could lead to. There's a reason why such activity is banned. You're not allowed to pretend to be aid workers. That's supposed to be sacrosanct. And in terms of this young man's testimony about seeing Americans, I mean, one possibility is, there are Americans who serve in the Israeli army. So that could have been it too, where he just sees Israeli soldiers and they're speaking in American accents. Obviously, it's impossible to know, but that's just one possibility. Because personally, I doubt that this is something the U.S. would cover up like that. Like, that's a pretty daring thing to risk being exposed. And for Jake Sullivan to go and say there are no U.S. forces on the ground, to lie about that, I'd be very surprised if that were the case. But again, with these people, you never know.
Here is video showing the aid truck going in. You can see it right there. Now watch what comes after it. And there was a civilian car with special forces dressed as Palestinian refugees who were fleeing from one area to another with mattresses strapped to the top of the car. And now there's looks like a Namur armored personnel carrier. Another one, and another one. Seems pretty clear to me, unless that's footage from some other location at another time, which it doesn't appear to be. So what has happened since then is that the World Food Program, which is directed by Cindy McCain, widow of late neocon warmonger John McCain, and mother of Zionist fanatic genocidal cheerleader Meghan McCain, has declared that the U.S. aid pier is actually now a military target or a military base, de facto base, and that they will no longer be able to bring food in through the Biden aid pier because of the threat to their workers, to aid workers, just because Israel used aid as a Trojan horse, as they've done again and again and again. Remember, there was an assassination late last year in Jenin inside a hospital where Israelis dressed as hospital workers and doctors and nurses to kill a man in his bed. This is something they've done consistently. They have an entire unit within the special forces called Mistaravim, where they're Mizrahi Israelis who are of Arab descent. They're Arab Jews, and they dress up as Palestinians. They put on kufiya, and they use them for assassinations, to sneak into areas to assassinate people. And also when there are Palestinian protests in the West Bank, they enter and create havoc within the protest, or create a pretext for crushing the protest because one of them will wave a gun. And then that will allow Israeli soldiers in uniforms to fire on the protesters. Something that's been well documented. So this will increase famine inside the Gaza Strip. USAID put out a bulletin on May 31st declaring that it is almost certain that there is famine in northern and southern Gaza. Now the U.S. is basically suspending aid deliveries there and resorting to those pointless aid drops from the air. And this is on Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken, who authorized this operation. I mean, this is just it's such a failure and a catastrophe on so many levels.